A warm good morning and hello. Lovely to see so many faces again after so long. Nearly 30 years ago today, I graduated from university. I've long forgotten many details about that day, but I do remember some of the details from one of the commencement speakers, who offered a challenge to the graduates that day at the end of his commencement speech. If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not this, then what? The speaker was the UN Environmental Secretary General, Maurice Strong, and he was speaking on the eve of the first Rio Environmental Summit. At the summit, he spoke in more detail about the emerging realities of climate change, the need for collective action, and he shared the same challenge with the delegates. His words could have just as easily been spoken in Davos last year or in this room today. If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not this, then what? That challenge is echoed in the theme of this year's Ecosperity, Accelerating Action at Scale. I didn't know it in advance, but I like where it leads, doing more and faster, because that is the challenge ahead of us. I'll speak shortly about the progress that is being made on that journey and some of the challenges ahead. But before I do so, it's useful to ground ourselves in a few facts and figures. ASEAN is going to require on the order of $3 trillion to decarbonize in line with a 1.5-degree pathway, a number that is on par with regional GDP this year. We see opportunities around the green economy emerging on the order of $1 trillion, yet investment today is still in the tens of billions. So while we are right to celebrate the progress and success that is being made, we should acknowledge that we're at the beginning of a very long journey ahead. What I will do at the end of this talk is offer some practical suggestions on things that can be done, not silver bullets that are perhaps years in the future, but what we can do with existing technologies to start to move the needle while we build for the future ahead. The good news is there are many reasons for optimism. We recently completed the third edition of our Green Economy Report together with Temasek and input from Microsoft. It looks at where does Southeast Asia stand on the journey ahead to net zero, where are investors going, and what is holding us back. The good news is since Ecosperity met in last year in September 21, regional ambition and commitments have reached a high water mark. At COP26, 8 out of 10 countries committed to net zero, far more than anticipated. And many others are considering carbon taxes or other means to put a price on carbon, an essential step to drive change at scale. Corporates, too, are also stepping up. There's been nearly a threefold increase in the number of regional companies that have committed to net zero or science-based target. So collectively, these companies represent market capitalization on the order of $115 billion across regional exchanges. A significant majority setting a role model for society at large. Consumers, too, are also stepping up. A Bain survey of 20,000 consumers across the region recently found that nearly 90% are prepared to pay more for products that have a sustainable impact from brands they trust, a real change. And investors, too, are also moving, with nearly 15% of all investment over the last 2 years having some element of sustainability relation. And 1 in 2 investors today saying that they explicitly consider carbon-related metrics in their capital allocation decisions. Taken together, collective commitments regionally have never been higher. Now, the green economy itself is made up of a few different sectors: energy, the built environment, and agriculture and nature. These offer the potential of direct benefits through new businesses, new revenues, and new jobs, as well as very tangible indirect ones through cost savings and energy conservation. Collectively, they offer a potential prize on the order of $1 trillion. So it's no wonder that that potential is attracting investment in capital today. We surveyed the landscape as part of this year's study to understand those investment flows and found strong momentum. Since 2020, a total of $15 billion has been invested across the green economy in non-governmental sources, and nearly 50% of that has been invested in the last 3 quarters alone. That, of course, cuts across many different asset classes. Corporates account for the bulk, with about 80% of that investment, with renewables and mobility attracting the most. But we're also seeing promising expansion in venture and sort of growth capital, as the pandemic has sparked much innovation in many new emerging startups. And there we see alternative proteins, food and agriculture, mobility, and other sources attracting a lot of interest. At the same time, we're looking over the horizon. We spoke to investors about where they're going next. And all classes expect to significantly increase behind us. To better understand the investing landscape, the Green Economy team also dove deeper into specific sectors and looked at opportunities. A wide range of opportunities do exist to abate carbon and capture green growth. Specifically, our analysis dove deeper into 6 sectors that were prioritized together with investors around 3 key criteria. First, can a solution be readily deployed today without new technology? Second, does it have material carbon abatement potential to 2030 and 2050? And third, is it one that has sufficient investor interest today? Across all of these sectors, we saw material opportunities in the medium term and niche ones in the short term. Renewables across wind and solar continues to grow and attract more capital. Electric mobility, after a slow start, is gaining momentum. The same goes for the built environment. And greater interest is being shown in sustainable farming, forest conservation, and carbon offsets and the like. Yet despite these opportunities, even in high potential sectors, there is a disconnect between where that potential lies in the future and immediately accessible investable plays today. Similar results are seen if we look at the other decarbonization levers across the region. These hard numbers present a more sobering picture of what the real road from Glasgow to Jakarta, Hanoi, and Kuala Lumpur looks like. There's no automatic connection between fine words and real action. As I shared earlier, the estimated cost to decarbonize in line with the 1.5-degree pathway regionally is $1.3 trillion. A massive investment relative to our GDP. And while we talk about the trillion-dollar prize, investment since 2020 was only $15 billion. So how do we account for that gap? What is it preventing investment from moving to greater scale? The fact is we're a long way off the challenge at hand. But if now is the moment and here is the place, and immense work has been done over the last few years to understand what the opportunities are, what is holding us back? Of course, the situation today is much more complicated than it was 12 months ago, as the situation in the Ukraine, rising food and energy prices, and inflation in raw materials for many green inputs is raising questions about how we move forward and how fast. Put simply, governments and investors have hard choices to consider, and not all factors are within our control. Nevertheless, by diving deeper into the issues and understanding where corporate leaders and investors stand, we've identified 3 core constraints that are within our control. If not individually, then at least collectively, and these problems need to be addressed if we're going to move the green economy and net zero forward. The first of these is political. Many Southeast Asia countries today simply lack sufficient incentives or penalties to drive the necessary behavior change. Country after country in Europe and other places has shown that such incentives are needed to kickstart investment at scale. It takes taxes to coach major emitters to materially cut back and adopt green solutions at scale. All need a push to consume less and emit less. Now, I say this not blindly, but also with empathy. Countries across the region, of course, have been materially challenged over the last 5 years. From COVID to many other sort of factors, it's very difficult to choose priorities and necessarily put incentives for renewables or EVs at the top of the list. Yet without such incentives and changes, we aren't going to achieve our goal ahead. The second constraint is a more structural one. We need to respect that achieving net zero requires a radical transformation of a system we spent a century building. We're not going to replace it overnight. And while we look for new solutions and new ideas, as we'll talk about here this week, we also have to look for ways to improve what is already here, in all sectors and at all levels. Too many countries in the region today seem to be betting heavily on new and emerging solutions, which is another way of saying they're betting on silver bullets, at the expense of rolling out known and proven solutions, which might not be as revolutionary, but actually can make a difference as we look at building momentum to 2030. Digging into Southeast Asia's abatement curve, we see that many such examples do exist, from sustainable farming to improving energy efficiency and the like. But they somehow don't find their way into serious plans. I'm not by any means suggesting that we shouldn't be getting behind hydrogen, carbon capture, and other new innovative solutions. But rather, a more holistic approach is needed that leaves no stone unturned and looks at abatement everywhere. This approach should also consider a more inclusive way of thinking about small and medium enterprises and smallholder farmers across the region, who account for an amazing half of GDP. We can't leave it to just the big players if we want to achieve the goals that have been set out. Smaller players need to be enrolled to also improve national and regional chances to deliver net zero and the milestones in between. The third constraint is more specific to the power sector and its transition. It is the thorny issue of systems costs, which of course is the elephant in the room whenever we talk about large-scale transformation of the energy sector. We simply have not fully acknowledged the true cost of introducing renewables at scale and upgrading the infrastructure, nor have we defined a practical timetable to do that. It is, of course, a challenge to get up here and talk about systems costs given the complexity in the issue and the fact that as we look across different markets, there are many factors that feed into it. But if we do look at some examples from elsewhere in the world, it helps us contextualize and at least understand what they are. If we look at Australia today, retail consumer prices, depending on which state you look in, nearly 20 to 30% of the price the consumer pays is related to system and integration costs. Similarly, we see very high costs in Europe, and some analysis that looks at different situations in the US shows that integration and systems costs can sometimes be on the order of 2 or 3 times the cost of levelized cost of electricity for a given project. So much more work is needed to sort of understand exactly what that is, because uncertainty will continue to inhibit investors unless we're able to do so. We believe that finding solutions to these 3 issues can help to unlock the pathway forward and get the results done. I'm not suggesting that any of this, of course, is going to be easy, but I did say at the beginning I would offer some suggestions on how we can make progress. In addition to the 3 constraints outlined, we've also identified 4 actions necessary to unlock the potential at hand. First, as I've already spoken about, national plans to translate net zero promises into net zero roadmaps and realities need to consider every option on the table. Game-changing ideas to decarbonize transport, address the deep challenges of heavy industry, and new fuel solutions for aviation are critically important. But equally so will be initiatives to address energy efficiency at scale, optimize supply chains, and promote sustainable agriculture. One might even consider some currently unthinkable investment ideas, such as reducing near-term emissions from heavy industry, improving efficiency of low-tech coal-fired power generation in Vietnam and Indonesia and other places, especially since many plans today expect these resources to be in place until 2030, 2040, or beyond. We simply cannot afford to be dogmatic and put all of our decarbonization eggs in a few baskets. Secondly, we need to have a more open and honest conversation about that power sector transition I mentioned. That includes how we're going to pay for grid upgrades, interconnections, and phasing out of existing assets, so that companies and investors can make informed decisions and get behind them. Thirdly, a more expansive role needs to be played by finance. Financial innovation is going to be critical to fund the innovation and open up activities with new segments like SMEs and farmers, as well as other plays around energy efficiency. The finance sector is among the most important in the acceleration that we seek to drive around decarbonization. So far, though, that at times has taken the form of moving investment only from carbon-intensive industries that, particularly in ASEAN, may continue to be here for the foreseeable future, into lower carbon ones we seek to incentivize and scale, effectively feeding green industries while starving new ones. Yet if regional governments do really intend to keep coal-fired generation and other heavy industry in place for another 15 to 20 years, is starving them completely of capital productive? Or is it more important to meet the imperative of making those industries as efficient as possible for as long as they're here? And the finance sector is uniquely placed to do that in a way that others cannot. Last but not least is the need to think about regional innovation and collaboration differently. Problems and solutions look very different at this elevation than here. And we see this is true across many of the different sectors in the region. For instance, countries like Singapore are land scarce and offer material opportunities for renewables and have capital, whereas others next door have plentiful land. Many countries need carbon credits, whereas others have plentiful resources and the opportunity to generate offsets. These are but a few of the examples that could be looked at, but more collaboration is needed. So bringing this together, we need to get real as we begin to translate COP26 plans to action about what we can do today opposed to tomorrow, what we can afford versus what we cannot, and how do we close the gap. That will take pragmatism and open discussion about all potential solutions. This is the moment to deliver on the promises of COP26 before the halo is gone. It is a moment to take bold action, and the potential is here, and the time is now. If not now, then when? If not here, then where? If not this, then what? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hardcastle. Really appreciate that.